Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It is Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, December 13th, Friday the 13th, if you fancy. I'm your host, Jon Jeune, at the real Jon Jeune _FF on IG and X. Happy Friday, beautiful people. It is week one of the fantasy football playoffs. It is finally here. Let's get going. It's time to win these chips. And it is the week 15 matchup show. So you already know the vibes. We are here to help you identify some fantasy football, some football players to help you with your fantasy football rosters. Some players that are either ranked outside of the top 20 of wide receivers and running backs, outside the top 10 of quarterbacks and tight ends, or in some cases, even identifying players ranked inside those thresholds that you might need to avoid or plan accordingly for by supplementing your lineup a little bit. As always, just make sure you are commenting, liking, subscribing, whether you're watching on YouTube, X, Twitch, Instagram, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts, or if you're watching on Spotify. Regardless of whether you're watching live or you're watching the show post-recorded, just make sure you are doing all of that stuff there. If you are watching live, feel free to jump in the comments. If you've got questions, now's the time to get them in. I know I often say that, if you have questions, feel free to DM me or reach out to me in the best way you see fit, and I'll do my best to respond. This weekend is probably not one of those weekends, unfortunately, as I'll be traveling and probably be a little bit disconnected. So if you want to get those questions in, try to get them in today, and I'll do my best to answer them in a timely fashion. That being said, let's jump into the matchup show. And the first game that we're going to talk through today is, what am I doing here? I'm just so excited to talk to you guys about these players that we got to get into our lineups for week 15 that I'm not even going through the breakdown of what transpired from the week before. All right, so we got to do some, I like to call it a little bit of accountability segment. Just kind of going through what happened the week before and some of the plays that we gave out, and being a little transparent about that. So that being said, last week we had given out 13 picks. We had 2 guys beat their ECR by 10 spots or more. We call those big hits. We had another 5 of the 13 guys beat their ECR outright, and we had 2 misses, 3 big misses. We obviously that's guys that missed their ECR by 10 spots or more, and a DMP did not participate, so it did not play. So it's a solid week for week 14 for some of those that were looking to get into the fantasy playoffs. And let's see if we can keep it rolling for week 15, but just kind of walk through who some of those guys were. Jordan Addison, big time hit, came in as the wide receiver 32 according to Fantasy Pros Expert Consensus Rankings. Finished as the wide receiver 3 overall. Was also my wide receiver start of the week. So, that feels like a double hit for me. Kendre Miller came in as the running back 79, finished as the running back 29. That one, I think the process was right. The results it was 10 carries, 32 yards, and a touchdown. He doesn't get the touchdown. It's a little underwhelming. However, we'll definitely, I think, for those that started him, we're looking for some running back help with the Brees Hall news and whatnot. I think, a running back 29 finish, a top, uh, an RB3 type finish was definitely within, what you were looking for or even hoping for at that point, especially when he was ranked as the running back 79. Um, Jameis Winston, the emergency glass came and ranked as the quarterback 18, ultimately finished as the quarterback 13. So another solid week, borderline QB1 finish there for Jameis Winston. And then Tommy Tremble, I mean, that one, I guess we kind of got lucky. Tight end 23 finished as the tight end 18. We did get news that Jatavian Sanders did play, so I think that kind of had a factor on Tommy Tremble's ceiling, and also I think the fact that they were both playing, they sort of cannibalized one another's fantasy production there. So, I think going forward, I'm probably going to avoid that situation with these tight ends. But hopefully we won't have to have that conversation for a while. Cooper Rush absolutely face planted. Still outperformed his expectation. Came in as the quarterback 22, finished as the quarterback 18. So that on paper that counts as a hit. But I mean, I was watching that game. Luckily, I know I had said that I was starting him in what was ultimately a must win for me, but I had already won my matchup by the time it got to Monday Night Football, and thank God, because I could not watch Cooper Rush continue to do nothing out there. It was pretty upsetting. Brandon Cooks, part of that same Cooper Rush thing, what came in as a wide receiver 56, finished as a wide receiver 49, did catch a touchdown, so you kind of felt good about that in the moment. But then you look at the final box score and you're like, yeah, this is underwhelming. This is not what I wanted to put in my lineup. So he counted as a hit. Kyler Murray, quarterback 5, he was ranked. We did not think that he would finish in the top 5, which he didn't finish in the top 10. But that's, I think, although on paper it looks like a hit, it's not really what I was expecting, especially when you consider the fact that I did say verbatim that I would play Caleb Williams ahead of Kyler Murray. And we obviously know how that worked out with Caleb Williams finishing as the quarterback 17. And then Brees Hall, he was ranked as the running back 11. We were saying not to play him. You couldn't trust him this week based on practice reports and usage from the week before, and the fact that be a part of a committee, depending on the health of his knee, and it was hard to trust, and turned out to make the decision very easy for us, as he did not play. He was listed as out later that Friday. So moving on to the misses, Nick Westbrook-Akine, wide receiver 36, finishes the wide receiver 65, absolute face plant at the wide receiver position. Ray Davis, running back 36, finishes the running back 62. Another face plant at at his position. Will Dissly came in as the tight end 12, finished as the tight end 27. Did walk away from that game injured, so that was unfortunate. But I guess those things do happen. Aiden O'Connell, same boat. Quarterback 20, finishes a quarterback 25. He also walked away from that game injured. And then Caleb Williams, don't really have that excuse for him because he was ranked as a quarterback 14, finishes the quarterback 17. Overall, it was just not great. So anyway, that is the recap from week 14, let's jump into week 15 as we have the Washington Commanders taking on the New Orleans Saints. And we've got Washington tight end Zach Ertz here as the ECR PPR tight end 11. New Orleans does not look like a great matchup on paper for opposing tight ends, allowing the 25th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. However, when you look a little bit deeper, the last 2 weeks were against Daniel Bellinger and Colby Parkinson. And shoot, they even allowed 9.5 PPR points to Daniel Bellinger just last week on 7 targets. So Ertz has had at least 6 targets in each of his last 4 games. And look, I don't hate the tight ends that are ranked ahead of Ertz, but I just want to clarify that I do believe Ertz is a tight end 1 this week. He is ranked as such. So I don't, there's no reason to get cute. I know, again, I say this all the time. Ertz is not the exciting player that you want to stick in your lineups, but he's going to get it done, especially with the target volume that he's been seeing. And with the Commanders seeing injuries at, Austin Eckler, who's utilized as a pass down back. Noah Brown, he's also a little banged up. So, I think they lean on Terry McLaurin. They lean on Zach Ertz here. Moving on to the next game here, we got the Cincinnati Bengals against the Tennessee Titans. And let's go with Tennessee wide receiver Calvin Ridley as the ECR PPR wide receiver 23. And it looks like Will Levis is going to give it a go this week. And while I would have preferred a fully healthy Mason Rudolph here, Ridley should continue to see volume with at least 6 targets in each game since week 6. And facing off a Cincinnati defense, allowing the 14th most PPR points to opposing wide receivers, including what they've been allowing to teams opposing number 1 receivers, right? Like they've allowed at least double-digit PPR points to at least one receiver, and primarily it's been the opposing team's number 1 receiver. But in some cases, they've even allowed two wide receivers to go over double-digit PPR points. That streak broke last week with the Cowboys and Cooper Rush. But let's see if Will Levis can get it back on track this week. Staying in this game, let's talk about Tennessee tight end Chig Okonkwo. We talked about him on the waiver show. He's the ECR PPR tight end 23. But if you're desperate at the tight end position and don't want to ride, say, the Kyle Pitts roller coaster, can I offer you a tight end who matches Kyle Pitts in targets the last 3 weeks with 11, yet has 7 catches compared to Kyle Pitts' 2, has 105 receiving yards compared to just 23 for Kyle Pitts, and has 1 touchdown compared to no touchdowns for Kyle Pitts? Not to mention, Chig has a great matchup this week against a Cincinnati defense, allowing the 4th most PPR points to the position. I'm willing to trust Chig Okonkwo over Kyle Pitts this week. And as you'll see at the tight end position, that's a common trend with some of the guys I'll be bringing up on the show. Next up, we've got the Miami Dolphins against the Houston Texans. And let's go with Miami wide receiver Jalen Waddle, as he's ranked as the ECR PPR wide receiver 31. Waddle has finished as a wide receiver 3 or better in each of the last 3 weeks, scoring double-digit PPR points in each of those games, including 2 wide receiver 1 finishes, of which was a top 3 finish. Over their last 3 games, I should say, Houston has allowed the 5th most PPR points to the position. So definitely a prime spot here for Waddle to continue his streak of production. Moving on to the next game, let's talk about the Kansas City Chiefs against the Cleveland Browns. And there's only one way to go here, and it's Cleveland quarterback Jameis Winston, as he's the ECR PPR quarterback 15. Again, have to break the emergency glass, then go right ahead. I think he's a borderline QB1 in this game. I would even play him ahead of a player I love a ton in Bo Nix. The matchup may not be great on paper, with Kansas City allowing the 20th most fantasy points to the position. But the amount of volume that we expect to see from Jameis, I don't think that matters much. We talked about Jameis last week. We talked about the lowest amount of pass attempts that he's had in a game outside of the Snow Globe game against Pittsburgh was 41. Last week, Jameis played against Pittsburgh. His pass attempts, 41. So consistency there. Um, I continue to expect that trend to continue, even if top tight end David Njoku does not play in this game. Moving on to the next game, we've got the Carolina Panthers hosting the Dallas Cowboys. And let's talk about Carolina wide receiver Adam Thielen, as he's ranked as the ECR PPR wide receiver 30. And I mean, how could you not play him after last week? He was in a tough matchup against Philadelphia that we all thought was one to shy away from, myself included. We talked about that on the waiver show leading into the week, that, hey, he's got to be picked up. But I think this is more of a transaction for next week, or, the following 2 weeks, week 15, week 16, or sorry, week 16, week 17. No, week 15, week 16, week 17. I did not think it was a pickup for week 14 with the matchup against Philadelphia. But he went off for 9 catches, 102 yards on 11 targets. Over his last 2 games, his first game back from injury, he was kind of limited. We talked about that on the waiver show then, that, hey, you pick this guy up, I think you can, stick him in your lineup, and, against Tampa Bay that week, and, expect the usage, the utilization to go up. And in the 2 games since the injury, the Tampa Bay game and the Philly game, he's had a combined 17 receptions for 201 yards and a touchdown on 21 targets over those 2 games. So his schedule down the stretch is awesome, but I especially like him this week in a matchup against the Dallas defense, allowing the 6th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. Staying in this game, let's talk about Dallas tight end Jake Ferguson, as he's ranked as the PPR tight end 15. And look, I know it wasn't a great showing for Ferguson last week, and so I understand the down ranking here for him, but this is another good matchup against the Carolina defense, allowing the 7th most PPR points to the position. And it is his 2nd game back from the concussion, so I think it'd be reasonable to expect a little bit more from him this week. Moving on to the next game, let's talk about the New York Jets against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And let's talk about New York Jets running back Isaiah Davis, ECR PPR running back 32. Everyone clearly knows to go to Braylon Allen if Breece Hall is out. So I'm not sure it's necessary to discuss Braylon Allen here, but unless you guys need to hear me say it, you can play Braylon Allen this week. But let's talk about the lesser-known Isaiah Davis. He finished as the running back 15 in week 14 after finishing as the running back 22 in week 13. He shared the running back opportunities with fellow rookie teammate Braylon Allen, and if Breece Hall sits again, I would expect to see similar usage, specifically in the pass game. This is a very good matchup for running backs, as they face a Jacksonville defense allowing the 4th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. And maybe you have to decide between Davis and Allen. I know that Davis is finished ranked higher than Allen the last 2 weeks. That's due to some touchdowns, right? The utilization in the pass game is obviously very nice to see from Davis. I think in a 2-man backfield, I think you see a little bit more even split like we saw last week. So it's not unlikely to think that Braylon Allen could see a touchdown, and maybe it swings in Allen's direction instead of Davis's direction. And the game script could also have an impact on Braylon Allen, right? The Jets are actually favored in this game as opposed to last week when they were 6.5-point dogs and they were trailing for a good portion of the beginning of that game. So if they are getting a lead, I think they probably lean on their hammer and Braylon Allen. But I think in real deep leagues, right, like with multiple flex spots, I think you can start them both, right? That's what I'm leaning towards in the League of Extraordinary People, and my first matchup against my former co-host Greg Penniman. So I'm gonna have to lean on both these guys. Got some injuries, so I don't see anything really wrong with playing both these running backs as they are taking on a Jacksonville defense, which is a great matchup, and the Jets are actually favored against Mac Jones, right? So we'll see. Speaking of Mac Jones, No, we're not going to talk about Mac Jones, but we're going to talk about one of his weapons in Jacksonville wide receiver Brian Thomas. And we're back to our guy, Brian Thomas, double-digit PPR points in each of his last 3 games. I mean, we used to talk about Brian Thomas at the beginning of this season a lot. I think we even talked about him week 1 before he played an NFL game. So a combined 29 targets during his last 3 games with 2 wide receiver 2 finishes over his last 2 games. And the New York Jets, they seem like a tough matchup because, they come to mind and you instantly start thinking of the names in the secondary. And maybe you don't trust Mac Jones, but with the amount of volume that Brian Thomas is expected to see, right? They don't have Gabe Davis. They don't have Christian Kirk. It's really just him and Evan Ingram and Parker Washington. And so with the amount of volume that he's expected to see and that he's been seeing, again, 29 targets over his last 3 games, it's pretty hard not to go with Brian Thomas given his big play ability, right? Because all he has to do is catch 1 or 2 of those long bombs for him to really make your day from a fantasy perspective. Now, moving on to the next game, let's talk about the Baltimore Ravens against the New York Giants. And I initially was going to talk about Mark Andrews here when I started doing, some of my early prep work, but he was moved up, and that's good because, definitely start Mark Andrews this week. But let's talk about Baltimore running back Justice Hill, as he's ranked as the ECR PPR running back 39. Instinctually, you might look at a game like this where the Ravens are 14.5-point favorites and say, well, that's not an ideal script for a player like Justice Hill. However, the Ravens have won 3 games by 10 or more points. And in those 3 games, Hill has finished as an RB3 or better. He's actually finished as an RB3, an RB2, and an RB1 in those 3 games. And so he hasn't scored less than 8.8 PPR points. And it's actually really funny because a lot of that production, you'd think, oh, well, maybe they got a lead, they gave him the ball. It's actually all done in the passing game, right? So I don't know, what the correlation is between, them having this great lead and then Justice Hill being utilized as a pass catcher. But if you are in a pinch, you need some running back help, definitely think you could go to Justice Hill in a pinch there. Moving on to the next game here, we've got the Indianapolis Colts against the Denver Broncos, and let's talk about Indianapolis quarterback Anthony Richardson. ECR quarterback 18, and look, obviously the Jameis Winston game against Denver is not going to happen every week. It's not going to happen this week, I don't think. However, of the last 5 games, the only 2 quarterbacks to score more than to not score more than 16 and a half fantasy points against Denver were Kirk Cousins and Gardner Minshew. And obviously both of them have, their own struggles and situations going on. Now, Richardson has 2 QB1 finishes in his last 3 games, turning from getting benched, with the only quarterback to finish coming against Detroit. He also has 3 rushing touchdowns over his last 3 games. So I'm willing to take the shot on Anthony Richardson, who's capable of having big games because of his legs. And I know I'm not talking about Bo Nix in this game. I didn't plan to, but I've already talked about him earlier in regards to Jameis Winston, and I'm going to talk about him now and as it relates to Anthony Richardson. I would play Anthony Richardson ahead of Bo Nix in this game. I know that's tough with how Bo Nix has been playing, but Indianapolis, they were often a team that we would target with our quarterbacks and our passing game. However, over their last 3 games, they've only allowed the 26th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Now that includes games against Drake May, Jared Goff, Aaron Rodgers, which some of these games don't look bad. The Jared Goff game, Jared Goff didn't throw any touchdown passes, so maybe that has some function of it. But Bo Nix had a matchup last week as well against, or in his last game as well against Cleveland, where it didn't really, um, look as good as we might have wanted there. So that being said, I think Anthony Richardson probably has more upside in this game, giving his rushing ability than Bo Nix. But I'm not, I don't think Bo Nix is in like must bench territory. Obviously he's gotten you this far, and you can continue to play him. So again, I don't hate him in this scenario. I don't hate his matchup particularly, but Anthony Richardson, I think, has more upside this week. Let's move on to the next game here. We've got the New England Patriots taking on the Arizona Cardinals, and let's talk about New England running back Ramondre Stevenson, as he's ranked as the ECR PPR running back 21. And look, now the Cardinals, they look even worse from a numbers perspective after allowing 38 PPR points to Zach Charbonnet last week. But Ramondre has been operating as the workhorse running back for the Patriots. So if anyone can replicate that production here, it is Ramondre Stevenson, who since week 8 has actually been the running back 21 in PPR points per game. So let's slot him in as an RB2 with upside for more here. And moving on to the next game, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. And let's talk about Tampa Bay running back Rachaad White. Now, I'm not sure Bucky Irving plays this week. And if that's the case, I would expect to see similar usage to what we saw last week from Rachaad White when Irving left that game banged up. LA Chargers are allowing the 10th most PPR points to the running back position over their last 3 games. So let's put White out there as a high-end RB2 with definite upside for more. Staying in this game, let's talk about a guy that didn't think that we would be talking about in the fantasy football playoffs, but the tight end situation is a mess. We have obviously there's Kyle Pitts, if you have to deal with Kyle Pitts, and then there's also the situation that we have with David Njoku, who we don't know what his situation is looking like from his availability. So let's talk about LA Chargers tight end Stone Smart, and that's got to be like a Hall of Fame name right there, Stone Smart. But anyway, he's the ECR PPR tight end 30, and Will Dissly not expected to play. Right, he's dealing with a shoulder injury. He's probably going to miss the next few weeks, they're saying. And he's got a match. Stone Smart has a matchup here against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have allowed the 14th most PPR points to the tight end position. And Stone Smart, in his only real NFL action as a pass catcher, had 3 catches for 54 yards last week. And so in this matchup, he'll probably be operating as the lead pass catching tight end in a good matchup against Tampa Bay. He's ranked as the tight end 30, right? So we're not. I don't know if I'd expect a whole lot, but if you don't want a zero from say Kyle Pitts, or you're just looking for 4 to 5 catches for 40 to 50 to 60 receiving yards, I think Stone Smart can do that for you. So again, it's a shot. It's a deep one, but if you're playing in a deeper league, I think you can go in this direction. And it feels like a very tight end heavy show because I'm about to give you 2 other tight ends in the same game. But let's talk about Pittsburgh Steelers against the Philadelphia Eagles. And I didn't want to talk about Freiermuth, but I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Freiermuth. So let's talk about Pittsburgh tight end Pat Freiermuth, ECR PPR tight end 14, has at least 59 yards or a touchdown in 4 of his last 5 games. Freiermuth has been pretty solid with 3 top 8 finishes, including 2 in each of the last 2 weeks, where he's had at least 48 yards and a touchdown. Not to mention George Pickens not expected to play again this week. And the matchup is a nice one, as teams tend to attack Philadelphia on the inside, trying to steer clear of their dominant outside cornerbacks. I think a tight end one finish is in play for Freiermuth. And again, the reason I didn't want to talk about Freiermuth is for a couple of reasons. A, he's probably not available in your league. And B, if you roster Freiermuth, you're probably have been playing Freiermuth for the last few weeks. But let's talk about Freiermuth, I guess. So make sure he's in your lineups if you have him. Unless obviously you have, like a Brock Bowers or Travis Kelce or, one of these other top guys that we would love to play. But let's stay in this game and let's talk about Philadelphia tight end Grant Calcaterra. Talked about him on the waiver show, ECR, PPR tight end 22. And again, another tight end that I'm willing to play ahead of Kyle Pitts this week. Calcaterra has scored at least 8 PPR points in 4 of his last 5 games, or 4 of the last 5 games that he filled in as the starting tight end for the Philadelphia Eagles. And this week he faces off against a Pittsburgh defense, allowing the 6th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. Again, common trend this week has been who tight ends I'd play over Kyle Pitts, because I'm a Kyle Pitts manager in multiple leagues, so there's some extra incentive for me here to find all these options that I would be willing to play over Kyle Pitts. But Kyle Pitts is rostered in like 90% of leagues, and he's been killing people the last few weeks. And so this is kind of my way of being able to talk about him, because the rankings don't reflect that he's being started, but he's being started because he's ranked this week. I don't know why I'm going on a rant about Kyle Pitts, but I'm not going to talk about Kyle Pitts later because he's ranked too low. I think he's like a tight end 18 or something in ECR rankings. So I'm not going to talk about him to play him, and I can't tell you not to play him because as per the rules, he's not in the threshold. So, but I know people are out there going to play him. People are listening to this show and they're going to be like, oh, I got to play Kyle Pitts because that's what I do. I drafted him in, the 5th, 6th, 7th round, and he's on my fantasy team and he's been on my team all year. And there was that stretch in the middle of the year where he was great, but we can't play Kyle Pitts this week, guys. And if he goes off for like 60 yards and scores a touchdown and has 8 catches, like I will live with that. I'm sorry that that happens, or if it happens, I'll be sorry, but I will not. I'm not gonna put Kyle Pitts out there and watch him on Monday night do cardio for 3 hours and catch 1 ball on 6 targets, because that's literally what he did last week. So I'm not gonna do it. Anyway, let's talk about this next game. The Buffalo Bills against the Detroit Lions. Let's talk about Buffalo wide receiver. That's a mistake. Detroit wide receiver, Tim Patrick, ECR PPR wide receiver 62, deep in the bag here. Tim Patrick has been helping us increase our bankroll the last 2 Thursdays. Well, not this past Thursday, but the 2 Thursdays prior, as we've been betting on his receiving prop. But last week was the first time that he's really showed any real fantasy value, and just in time against a Buffalo defense, allowing the 11th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. In a game with the highest total on the week, I will take my chances on the number 3 wide receiver in one of the best offenses in football. Next up, let's talk about the Green Bay Packers and the Seattle Seahawks. And honestly, this game is weird. Outside of the obvious names, Josh Jacobs, Tucker Kraft, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then whichever Seattle running back is healthy and ready to go, it doesn't look like it's going to be Kenneth Walker, so Zach Charbonnet. I don't really care for the players in this game a great deal, but the rules are the rules, so I have to pick somebody. But there's nobody ranked high enough that I'm like, yeah, don't play that person. And there's not really a lot of people ranked low enough. So in deeper leagues, I'm saying, hey, deeper leagues, 2 quarterback leagues, I think you can trust Geno Smith. Facing against the Green Bay defense, allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the position over their last 3 games. He's ranked as the quarterback 23. I don't think he's a QB1. Is he like a high-end QB2? Yes, possibly. Quarterback 16, 17, 18. Yeah, I think that's reasonable to expect. Again, am I going to start him in a one quarterback league? No, I'm not. So, yeah, do with that information what you may, but I had to play the game. Anyway, let's move on to the next game here. We've got the Chicago Bears against the Minnesota Vikings. And let's talk about Chicago wide receiver DJ Moore, ranked as the ECR PPR wide receiver 26. Minnesota allows the third most PPR points to the position over their last three games. The Chicago offense has been struggling, but Moore hasn't seen less than 6 targets since week 9. Shoot, over his last 2 games, he's seen 27 targets. He's finished as a wide receiver 1 or better in 2 of his last 3 games, including a game against this same Vikings defense where he had 106 yards and a touchdown, finishing as the wide receiver 4 overall. I'm going to trust DJ Moore this week. And moving on to the final game. Could you believe we have 2 Monday Night Football games? I really don't like the 2 Monday Night Football games. It's kind of annoying, low key, but yet here we are. I mean, when football goes away and like we're not watching it, I'm going to be like, oh man, what I would do for 2 Monday Night Football games or like a crappy Thursday night game. Sure. But in the moment right here, right now, I don't care for 2 Monday night games. But anyways, besides the point, we got the Atlanta Falcons going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. And let's talk about our old friend, Jacoby Myers, ECR PPR wide receiver 24. Now, look, there's a couple of things playing against Jacoby Myers here. He popped up on the injury report on Thursday with an ankle injury. And then he has the possibility of having to play football with Desmond Ridder this week. So those 2 things seem like they would be detriments potentially to Jacoby Myers. Desmond Ridder probably more than the ankle injury. But this matchup here against Atlanta is literally the best one you can have for an opposing wide receiver, as they've allowed the most PPR points to the wide receiver position over their last 3 games. And obviously, we talked about this matchup last week as Minnesota was facing them, and Jordan Addison had his big game, as did Justin Jefferson. But going into that game, they were 6th, right? So it's not like they're ranked highly because of what happened last week. They were ranked highly going into last week, and then Minnesota just, had an offensive explosion. So Jacoby Myers has been very, more than solid, right? He's going to be the top target alongside Brock Bowers. So, yeah, I'm going to lean heavily on Jacoby Myers. Let's see what his practice availability looks like this week. He seems like he picked up the injury during the week, but he was still able to be limited in practice on Thursday. So let's see what his availability looks like Friday. We'll also get a practice report on Saturday since they play on Monday. So if Jacoby Myers gets at least 1 full practice in before Monday's game, I think we can go there. But if it becomes a situation where it's like, hey, he's a game time decision, there's some questions, then maybe you pick up this next guy and you just wait and see what happens. Atlanta wide receiver Ray McCloud, ECR PPR wide receiver 52. And Ray's back on the list. He finished as a wide receiver 21 last week after finishing as a wide receiver 28 the week before, with at least 95 receiving yards in each of his last 2 games. And now he's walking into a matchup against a Las Vegas Raiders defense, allowing the 4th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. So again, whether you need to pick up Ray McCloud and play him, or whether you are the Jacoby Myers manager and you need a player like Ray McCloud to be able to pivot to, or you're playing the Jacoby Myers manager and you want to potentially block them from having an option to play, Ray McCloud. Now, make sure, obviously, as always, we always talk about get those Thursday night players out of your flex. Well, the reverse is kind of true for these Monday night players. They should be in your flex, right? Because if Jacoby Myers can't go, you got blocks from getting Ray McCloud, then you go pick up Sincere McCormick. ECR PPR running back 25, right? And he's gotten the stamp of approval as the starting running back from Antonio Pierce. And similar to last week when last year, I should say, when Zamir White was crowned the guy in this backfield, Antonio Pierce was instrumental in making sure that Zamir White got fed. And I think the Raiders are going to feed McCormick. Now, we talked about this on the waiver show. I don't think the matchup is particularly great. And there's also this risk of this game getting out of hand for the Raiders, especially with Desmond Ridder under center. But I think we can lean into the volume here for McCormick, making him a volume-dependent RB2. And if he falls in the end zone, that'll make his fantasy day in a much more productive manner. Now, that's all I got for the matchup show, but let's talk about Week 15 starts of the week. And let's recap the Week 14 results. It was a mixed bag, very mixed bag. Caleb Williams, quarterback start of the week, finishes the quarterback 17, not great. San Francisco running back Isaac, wow, I can't say his name right now. San Francisco running back Isaac Guerendo finishes the RB2 as the running back start of the week. So that's obviously fantastic. We'd love to see that. Love to see those kinds of finishes from the starts of the week. And the Minnesota wide receiver Jordan Addison, who was the wide receiver start of the week, finished as the wide receiver 3 overall. So again, love those types of performances. And then we get another bad one from Dallas tight end Jake Ferguson, who was the tight end start of the week last week against Cincinnati. Again, not great. I could blame some of that on him. I could blame some of that on Cooper Rush. I like to blame all of it on Cooper Rush because Cooper Rush kind of stinks. Anyway, let's move on to the Week 15 starts of the week, and let's talk about a guy we previously talked about in this segment or in this show, Indianapolis quarterback Anthony Richardson against Denver. And again, like I said, the Jameis Winston style game from last week, it's not going to repeat. But Denver still allows plenty of quarterback production. Over the last 5 games, the only quarterbacks that failed to top 16.5 fantasy points was Kirk Cousins and Gardner Minshew. Richardson has 2 QB1 finishes in his last 3 games with 3 rushing touchdowns in that span. His rushing upside makes him a great play this week against the Denver Broncos. Moving on to the running back start of the week, let's talk about Dallas running back Rico Dowdle against Carolina. Since week 12, Dowdle ranks as the RB12 in PPR points per game. He's 4th in rush attempts and 2nd in yards during that span, trailing only Saquon Barkley in yardage. He now faces a Carolina defense giving up the 9th most PPR points to the running back position over their last 3 games. Dowdle has emerged as a reliable fantasy option. Start him with confidence as you chase this next round of the fantasy playoffs. Moving on to the wide receiver position, another guy we talked about in the matchup segment, Chicago wide receiver DJ Moore versus Minnesota. Again, Minnesota allows the 3rd most PPR points to the wide receiver position over their last 3 games. And despite Chicago's struggles, Moore has seen 6 targets in every game since 6+ targets in every game since week 9, including 27 targets over his last 2 games. He's finished as a wide receiver 1 in 2 of his last 3 outings, including a wide receiver 4 finish with 106 receiving yards and a touchdown against this same Vikings defense. Let's trust DJ Moore this week. Staying in this same game, let's go to the tight end start of the week in Minnesota tight end TJ Hawkinson versus Chicago. Hawkinson's performances have been hit or miss lately, but one of his top 5 finishes since return, he's had 2 top 5 finishes since returning from the ACL, and one of those came against this same Chicago Bears defense. And actually, since that game, Chicago has allowed 15.6 PPR points to the team's opposing tight end in each of the last 3 games. With a favorable matchup and a proven ceiling, Hawkinson is a strong play this week. Y'all, that is all I have for the fantasy football starts of the week for week 15 for this first round of the fantasy football playoffs. This was the matchup show. Appreciate y'all for being here with me, and hopefully you take some of this information and you bring it into your matchups this week, and you come back next week having advanced to the second round of the fantasy playoffs. And if you didn't advance, or maybe you are still not, you're not in the playoffs, just remember, stay locked in, continue to soak up this content, whatever content you're listening to, whether it's my content or somebody else's content, but whether just continue to soak in that content and stay within the flow of the game, so you can understand some of these players that are going to have big performances, that's going to lead to some decisions that we make in the off season in regards to their ADP and whatnot. Also, if you have the bye in your fantasy football playoffs, remember, if you're playing on a platform that allows you to drop players after they've already played, like Yahoo, that's the default setting, right? You can drop a player after they've played. Bench your entire roster. It'll help you maintain maximum flexibility throughout the fantasy playoffs, right? At least the first round of the fantasy playoffs, right? If a player gets injured, you can pivot on the spot. You can use that opportunity to pick up and drop backup running backs, right? People think the bye week is a great time to remove yourself from fantasy and not think about it and not worry about it. But I like to think of it as an opportunity to get myself ready for the next couple rounds, right? And being able to pivot almost instantaneously without having to, oh, I can't drop this player because they're in my lineup. I can't do this. I can't do that. Like all of those, none of those things. The world is your oyster at that point when you have the bye. So you can use it to kind of disconnect and have that week off. But I'm using it to maintain flexibility to prep myself for week 16. Because again, this game is a terrible game. Anything can happen. I remember being on bye one time in a 2-quarterback league, and I have Josh Allen and Kyler Murray, and I'm thinking I'm going to win the league, and Kyler Murray tears his ACL on the Monday night game, right? So obviously I couldn't pivot then, but if you have the opportunity to pivot, then yes, do it. I mean, I tell a story all the time. One of my best friends had Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley goes down with a foot injury in the middle of, during like the 1:00 games, and he's able to drop Calvin Ridley and he pivot to another player who ended up being one of the top waiver wire targets for week 16, right? And had he started a lineup and said, oh, I wonder how many points my team is going to score, he would not have been able to drop Calvin Ridley. It was a season-ending injury that occurred. A lot of injuries that occur in week 15, week 16, week 17 are season-ending injuries if they're longer than a week, because these players, the season's almost over, especially if a team is not making the NFL playoffs. So use that to your advantage. Use that flexibility to your advantage, and good luck this weekend, guys. Good luck in your matchups. Again, if you have questions or things like that, feel free to reach out to me today. I'll do my best to answer them. If you do reach out, I'll do my best to answer in period in general, but can't promise anything. Well, have fun, guys. Good luck, and we'll see y'all on Tuesday for the waiver show. Peace.